Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I didn't know what to expect for this talk because this is like so out of character with the other talks that are going on here at this conference. I am going to be talking about learning, actually learning HTML and CSS and JavaScript and jQuery and Sass and how all these things fit together. And so I just wanted to make that clear to you. I'm not actually going to be teaching any code today, so if you're expecting somebody to teach code, you're in the wrong place. There's a number of other great talks at this time slot. Okay, so to get you started here, this is me. My name's Jen Kramer, and I've been teaching web design since 2001, which is about the time that I learned it. And so I actually learn best by teaching, so I've discovered over the years that the best way to go is to try learning some of these new concepts and then get on out and start teaching them. And I improve my own understanding of material, which is why I love teaching so much. So for many years, I was a freelancer. I ran my own web design company out in the backwoods of Vermont and New Hampshire on dial-up. Yeah, I'm that old. But I've always been teaching on the side, and I've totally loved it. And in about 2012, I woke up one morning and said, you know what? I think I can actually make a living just teaching. So I sold my house, I sold my web design business, and I moved to Boston, where there's 100 colleges and universities. And I said, 100 colleges and universities, somebody needs an instructor there. It won't be Harvard, because Harvard, they only want PhDs. And so I am now a lecturer, which is a professor-like job at Harvard. I teach at Harvard Extension School, which is really exciting. And I'm in the Department of Digital Media. And I also work for O'Reilly, where I am the senior staff author. So I'm about 2 months in for both of these jobs. Prior to that, for the last 15 years, I've been a consultant. So it's weird being employed again. But at least I'm employed in 2 places, so I still feel like I'm consulting. And so I'll be making a lot of video in the coming year for O'Reilly. So keep an eye out for that. All right, so because I am so old, I love going down memory lane. And so I was thinking about, what was it like when I first started learning web design? And so my life for first learning web design was Macromedia. Anybody remember that company? Macromedia Dreamweaver 3. Okay. Photoshop 5.5, which had a separate program associated with it called Image Ready. That's how you got your images ready for the web. Anybody so old they remember that? Oh yeah, man, those were good days, right? And the biggest question that we had about media was should it be a 640 by 480 or 800 by 600? There were only 256 colors to worry about, so what were the least ugly of the web-safe colors in the 216 web-safe color palette? Anybody remember those days? And Linda Weinman, she actually wrote books like this one on Photoshop 5.5 and Image Ready 2.0. She wrote books. She used to put in little DVDs in the back that had a few videos on them. Yeah. That's before she sold lynda.com to LinkedIn for $1.5 billion. Okay, so let's now think about 2015, okay? So if we start thinking about 2015, there's a few technologies you probably have to learn. These had nice logos. That's how I picked them, okay? That's just the technology. Notice there's no software up there. I mean, you could sort of say the Joomla, Drupal, WordPress, that's kind of software, but there's nothing like Dreamweaver or Photoshop that we learn anymore these days. Then, of course, we have all the various different platforms that we have to learn these technologies on. The first picture looked kind of Apple-like, so I put up Windows and Android as well. And then, of course, then we have our old friends, the browsers. There you go. Yeah. Internet Explorer, the problem that's been with us for at least 15 years. Yeah. In the old days, we worried about Internet Explorer 3 and supporting that. So, in fact, when I got started, we were still at the stage where we were building one site for Netscape 4 and one site for Internet Explorer, 2 entirely separate code bases, entirely duplicate content, and all the rest of it. So those of you kids who complain about cross-browser compatibility these days, you have no idea. It was really horrible back in the day. So I also walked uphill both ways in the snow and the blinding sun to get an ice cream cone 10 miles. So anyway, so how are we teaching differently in 2015? We've got incredible search engines, Google was just coming into existence as I started on this journey. how have we changed the way that we teach this material in 2015? What are we doing differently, and how are we teaching the web differently? When I came to this, I just learned HTML. There was no CSS, so I've added on to what I know over the last 15 years. But if you come into this field now, think of all the stuff that you have to learn immediately. So usually this is the answer that you get, and I quote, "Google the shit out of it," right? Google the shit out of it. It's all out there on the internet. Everything you need to know, it's on the internet. But the problem is that when you're a beginner, you don't necessarily know what to Google, right? And you ask stupid questions, and people critique you for asking stupid questions, right? So what do? So I did a search. I tried to think as a person just coming into this, and I typed in "build a website" into Google. So here's the results that I got. I can only show 7 links up here. Links 1, 2, 4, and 5 are going to products. So I get Wix, Squarespace, GoDaddy, and Weebly. So those are those links up there. So I can go and build my own website in all those various places. Again, I have no idea what's better than anything else. I'm just coming into this field. Number 3 is a link to Code Academy. Okay, so you can go there and learn to build a site that looks exactly like Airbnb's homepage. Wow, what an introduction to web design, like rebuilding Airbnb's homepage, really? And then number 6, towards the bottom here, it says how to make a website step-by-step guide for beginners. He starts off describing the differences between Drupal, Joomla, and WordPress. Tells you can make your own decision about which CMS you want to learn first. Now, imagine yourself as a beginner. How are you going to actually make that decision? I have no idea. He's like, WordPress is pretty good, but maybe you don't actually want to use WordPress. Can you imagine somebody starting off with Drupal? Any Drupal fans in the room? Drupal is like pretty awesome, but oh my God, the learning curve, right? Okay, so I feel like this. So this is a picture that I found on the IKEA website, and I look at this picture and I think, wow, what a nice looking living room. Wouldn't it be awesome to come home in the evening and go to this living room and put my feet up on the couch here and watch some TV? And then I think, okay, so how do I put together a living room like that? Because I have like 0 design skills at all. It's not my thing. I am wearing black today because I've been told that black goes with everything. So hopefully I match. I'm challenged. So I start looking at this picture a little bit more closely, and I think, how did they pick those 5 pictures up there in the top corner? One of those pictures is the alphabet. How would I pick the alphabet to go hang on the wall in my apartment? I'm not sure I'd ever pick that out. How would I pick out those pillows and arrange them so artfully? And then if you actually start looking at what's on the shelf over there, it's like empty bottles and flower pots. More things that I wouldn't necessarily think of doing. So I feel very challenged looking at this kind of thing. And I imagine that people who do website design or wanting to come into our field look at website design the same kind of way. They just don't know where to start. So I premise the following. Google the shit out of it doesn't work for everybody. And then a lot of people wind up going to hack school, or they wind up going to university because they just can't figure out where to start. They don't know where to start. So they sign up for one of these introductory web classes and hope for the best. They cost a lot of money. Maybe they're not going to learn the most recent skills. Absolutely true to university, not so much at a hack school, okay? And this is one of the big problems with universities that we have. It's very seldom that a university curriculum is actually up to date with the latest offerings. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked to teach Dreamweaver, like in 2014. Yeah, I still have a lot of people asking me to teach Dreamweaver. So this guy here, this article that was in the Chronicle, which is a higher education kind of thing, this guy says, one of the things that non-credit can do faster than for-credit, non-credit being like hack schools and so forth, as opposed to credit being like universities, is that they respond to the employer's needs. The university can't be changing its curriculum every 6 months. This is a real problem for universities. If you're going to offer a degree, if you graduate this year, your degree should mean the same as the person who graduates next year, right? So we have to standardize the curriculum, but yet at the same time, we somehow have to manage to continue to offer up-to-date skills. So here's some skills that you might consider front-end web developers probably need to know right now. Here's some things. The most important one on that list is the one in the lower right. How do you identify the next hot piece of technology and learn it? I would argue that's actually in some ways more important than actually walking out of your degree program and doing any of those other things. That other stuff is going to give you the background. So if you know HTML5 and CSS3, you're ready for CSS4. If you know JavaScript, you're ready for the framework of the week, right? But identifying that next hot thing and learning it, that's a real skill that we all need to have, and that's where Google's shit out of it comes in, right? The problem is now, once again, where do we start? Where do we start? And one of my favorite things ever is this. Prior computer experience required, which leads to my own personal saying, which I'm trying to turn into a meme, 50% of the problem is file management. Any instructors in the room? I mean, you. Okay. A few of us, right? Am I right? Am I right on the file management thing? 50% of the problem is file management. Especially now, okay, so 15 years ago when I was starting out, we used to critique Windows and Apple for these interfaces that we couldn't understand. There were all these files in these folders, especially on PCs. Like, what was your C drive and what was your D drive and the A drive when we had A drives? And how do you move the files around between all these kinds of things? These days, let me ask you guys, how do you access the files on your phone? Anybody ever tried to actually get to the files on your phone? How do you get to the files on your phone? You got to download an app. Yeah, it's true, you do have to download an app in order to get to the files on your phone, right? It doesn't matter whether it's an iPhone or Android or, I haven't tried a Windows phone. Anybody tried a Windows phone? I assume it's the same. Is it the same? It's the same, okay. So yeah, we've done this great job of starting to hide our file structures, but the result is that students who come to my class in 2015, they do not understand file management anymore. So this is actually where we have to start. What's the difference between a file and a folder? How do we put together all of our files in one location in order to build a website? Strange but true, okay? So, and the other part of this is that we don't necessarily want to teach that at the university community. So I teach graduate classes at Harvard University Extension School. I don't want to teach file management to graduate students. I don't think that's appropriate. So where are they going to get knowledge of file management from? How do they actually get this so that they can get started on actually learning HTML? So these are some questions. I don't have answers. I just ask a lot of questions. How are we going to teach this going forward? But in any case, assuming that they actually have a file management background, then we get on to HTML5. And we do a patented ugly web pages exercise. So I make people build web pages with just plain old HTML. Yes, plain old HTML. And they're going to be Times New Roman, bold, ugly, honkin' ugly. And the students try very hard to put in line breaks and center tags and all kinds of other things, trying to make the page look reasonable and interesting. And I keep explaining to them the point is for it to look ugly and that this is actually the structure of your web page. And they hate this. They absolutely hate this exercise. And they try desperately to make beauty out of where there is none possible. So anyway, this is where we start. Then we finally move on to CSS3 and we start making things pretty, which is awesome. They're like really happy, right? This is one of my favorite CSS3 cartoons ever. Yeah, that happened when that comet probe landed on the comet. You know, somebody came out the same day with this meme on Facebook. I was like, yes, so true. So we obviously spend a lot of time on how to get stuff to align properly on a web page using CSS. But this is what we do next. So usually the students don't have a trouble with that. The link between HTML and CSS is pretty clear. They understand how these things relate to each other. And we're working with code that winds up looking like this, right? So there's some HTML, there's some CSS, and everybody goes, yay, okay, we totally understand styling. So what's the next thing that they're supposed to know after they know HTML and CSS? Anybody know what comes next in the curriculum? Yeah, that. Totally looks like HTML and CSS, right? Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, so easy to understand. How many of you who are nodding your heads, oh yeah, that's easy. How many of you have already knew one programming language when you tried to learn JavaScript? Yeah, my point exactly. How many of you have tried to learn JavaScript without knowing one other programming language? How did that work out for you? Was it okay? Do you actually feel like you know what you're doing? I don't. Usually by the time we get here, this is what happens. I just started learning to use Keynote, so there you go. Yeah, that's what happens. They don't understand. We jump right from CSS, we jump right to JavaScript, and it's a problem. So usually every programming book I've ever read, because I have tried really hard to learn programming. I've tried so hard. Usually every book follows this, Hello World. I could write Hello World in like 15 languages. I am so good at Hello World. And then like the next chapter, it goes on to, by the way, here's a variable, and here's math, and here's if else and a loop, and oh, that thing called an array. And yeah, now you can program. Awesome, off we go. And we start like building out all this stuff. There's a leap that happens in here that breaks everything for me. And it's the part that's called algorithmic thinking. So how do we approach these kinds of problems? How do we think them through from start to finish? How do we start to put together an actual program? As opposed to, here's a variable, and here's a loop, and here's an array. Okay, it's like saying, okay, you know all the letters of the alphabet, now you can read. Here's A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It doesn't quite work that way. We need to do the things a little bit more gently. And we lose a lot of students who are really promising for this reason. My game developer friend down here in the front of the room. And we wind up here prattling on about data structures and all the rest of it, and like people are like, dude, I just want to program a game. Why do I have to learn all this stuff? And so I think we really can do better. I think we can do better. I think we can ease people into learning programming a lot better, and I think Sass is actually the way that we go about doing that. So Sass is a learning bridge. How many of you have worked with Sass? All right, so what is Sass? Somebody define it for me. It compiles, yes. It's a preprocessor, yes. It extends CSS, yes. So it's a way of like combining sort of these wonderful parts of programming along with CSS, right? Okay, so Sass becomes this learning bridge, right? So as probably arguably the most popular preprocessor out there, and the fact that Bootstrap 4 is dropping less in Bootstrap 4, they're going only with a Sass implementation, I think is going to put the nail in the coffin for less, by the way. Sorry, less fans. I think Sass is really the one. Oh, you don't agree with me? Oh, we're using less. I'm sorry. I'm not sure it's long for this world. Sass is really the most popular preprocessor. It's got data structures that resemble a lot of other programming languages, which is a wonderful thing. So you can do all this stuff, variables and the math and the loops and et cetera, et cetera. It's all built into Sass, okay? You don't have to do any weird hackery. It looks like other programming languages. You can also take your file structure and you can break it up into partials. There's all kinds of wonderful stuff you can do with file management from here. Okay. And it also introduces concepts like compiling, which of course is not something that you've ever encountered if you're on a CSS and HTML curriculum. Workflows, so you can start to introduce things like grunt and gulp. What are all those other ones? Bower, compass. Oh my God, there's so much stuff you can introduce. And code reuse. All right, so let's look at exactly how this works. Variable, check. Okay, there we go. This is instantly identifiable to anyone who knows CSS, because they go, oh my God, you mean I only have to write that color once? I don't have to write it 5,000 bazillion times, and then the boss is going to change that color yet again for the second time today, and I have to go back and change it all again? I can just change it in one spot? Awesome. I love it. We're totally using it. Okay, so that's good. Math. So here's a concept. We're teach our designers, okay, so we got a space, right? And I've called it space because it could be padding, it could be margin, whatever it happens to be. But we can also keep our proportions. Oh, what a wonderful idea. We understand the concept of proportions because we're designers. So we want proportionately the spacing to be the same no matter what screen size we're working with. Maybe the value of space is going to change through media queries, but half space here, it's always going to scale with it because it's half of space, right? Okay? So this is a cool way to start thinking about programming. Oh, I need to think ahead to these design concepts. All right, so anybody familiar with the % sign here in Sass? These are extends. So this is an extend-only class. That's what those are. And hooray for trumpets? Is that trumpets outside? Somebody doing a fanfare for me? So here's a concept of code reuse. We've got over here on the side, we've got here's a bunch of stuff, okay, for this box. And then the boxes are going to be a little bit different. So we're going to extend box over here and add some things that make them different. Oh, that's kind of cool. But did you notice here in the code that over there on the left side we had a color white, but over here box primary has the color of primary color. And when we compile, we're actually going to call color twice, right? The property is going to be declared twice in the outputted CSS. So that leads to other things we got to think about, like mix-ins. Oh, okay. So now we had the concept of grouping together styles we use over and over again. Now we can start talking about the concept of passing in some variables. When we pass them in, then we don't have to write over these other values again and again, right? We can just go on ahead and say, instead, whatever they're doing out there, we can say instead where we can pass in these values and modify this chunk of code that way. How cool is that? Which leads to, that kind of looks like a function, doesn't it? May you think that looks like a function? Sort of vaguely. Which brings in the concept of functions, okay? So here's the darken function, another function that every designer in the world loves. And the opposite of darken is lighten, right? There you go, now you know two functions in Sass. Pass in your color, pass in a percentage, and it gets darker or lighter. No more running off to other websites and having to type in numbers and trying to make things darker or lighter, or going into Photoshop to do all that, right? Good times. So then that brings into the concept of, can you write your own function? Yes, you can. So here's a function that takes your values in pixels, which designers like to think in, and converts them to ems, which are better for responsive design. Cool. So we're going to write a little function here. Pass in a value in pixels. We'll set our base font size. We talk about default values. In this particular example, we do our math. So then we can call it, which I think that works out to be 20 ems, if I remember correctly. Nice, okay? So there's a function. Now when we know what functions are, then we can start on if statements. So here we are on if statements. So this chunk of code here actually comes from Foundation 4. And basically what it says, if the background is dark, make the text light. Otherwise, it's a light background, so make the text dark. I don't remember if that's exactly it, but that's the gist of what's going on up here. And there's some other styles that are involved in that as well. So how cool is that? You can set a color coming in. You know what the background color is. You test the HSL, hue, saturation, and lightness value. And you figure out if it's a light color or a dark color. And then you set your text color to be something that's contrasting enough that you can actually read it. Okay? So that's a really great if-else example that's immediately relevant to a designer. Okay, and then finally here, my last example. This is a chunk of code that comes from the Sass documentation website. And so this is an each loop, okay? And the top is actually the loop, and the bottom is the CSS that gets written out here. So here, for each animal in, oh gosh, what does that look like? Puma, sea slug, egret, salamander. What does it look like? Oh gosh, it looks like an array, doesn't it? Oh, this is how you introduce arrays, people. Show them something that actually makes sense. Don't try to explain to them what an array is. Give them code where it makes sense. Okay, so here's an array. We're going to loop over this little bit of code, and now you don't have to keep typing in the same stinking thing over and over again, because it's going to go ahead and write it out for you so nicely right here with CSS. So there we go. So there's our background images, all written out so nicely here. How cool is that? All right, and I could go on for for and while loops, but you get the idea. So here I've showed you just a few examples of Sass data structures that you can just put right to work trying to introduce these kinds of concepts right to people who are brand new to programming and have no idea, but who do have a background in HTML and CSS. And that's the whole point of this, is to try to ease people into programming. So you ease them into it. Now they start to understand what these data structures are. You don't have to start with, this is an array, and it consists of a series of pairs of values, and blah, 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 and all the other things that make eyes roll into the back of heads. Oh my gosh, how many lectures have you sat through that are like that? This is far more fun. Okay, so once they've gotten through Sass, what's going to come next? And this is where people start throwing things at me, but I'm standing by this. The next thing you introduce is jQuery. I know, oh my God. We're teaching people how to do shortcuts before we actually teach them JavaScript. But here's the reason why jQuery. Okay, jQuery, how do you select things in jQuery? CSS selectors, okay? How many lines of code does it take you to like fade something in or fade something out? Like 1 line of code? That's pretty good, huh? Okay, give people the early win. Give them the early win. Look, you can make things faded in and out. You wrote your own little program here with jQuery. When I teach this, we make like the worst web page ever after the ugly web pages that we made. We now like make ugly web pages on steroids. So by the time we're done, there's like stuff that's fading in and fading out, scrolling up, scrolling down, and of course it's all on load because we haven't actually gotten to events yet. So you go into the web page and there's like all this gyration that happens. It's awesome. And then in week 2, then we get into like events. So then they happen on click. But I think this is a great way to do this. So I teach them jQuery for that reason, okay? And then once you know jQuery, then you can expand jQuery. So instead of now just the 1 line of code to do fade in, fade out, let's figure out exactly what the lines of code are in JavaScript to make that same kind of thing happen. So once again, we've eased into this. Instead of like just making heads explode, we ease into it. And then, once I know a bit about JavaScript, then we get into the framework du jour, whatever it happens to be. What is the hot framework right now? Angular, Polymer, React. Any others? Bootstrap? Somebody? That's it? Meteor? Meteor, anyone? Okay. Anyway, so it just brings to mind this. Like the most awesome meme ever. Okay, so in the end here, this is really what teaching is all about, okay? It's not about showing off how much you know to a bunch of people who don't know anything. Great teachers are able to take that maze and they're able to turn it into a path. They're able to think about exactly what you need to know the next thing and step people through it very, very carefully. Once you get a grounding in those basics, Google the shit out of it becomes a totally viable learning strategy. And I imagine most of you who are here today, Google the shit out of it is a great learning strategy for you. There's no reason for you to go back to school and learn this stuff. You already learned it. But when you are trying to help your friend who says, hey, I'm thinking about switching my career and I'd really like to go back to, I'm thinking about becoming a web developer, I'm thinking about going into web design, instead of saying, oh, HTML's the thing, just Google it, you'll find it. Be a little kinder, give them a little bit more to work with, give them a better place to start so that they don't have so many options. The other thing that we like to do as programmers is like that guy from the earlier slide who was trying to tell beginners that you could build your website in Joomla, WordPress, or Drupal. Don't give your beginners too many options. Please just tell them one thing. One thing, that's all, just one. So for example, when you start teaching CSS colors, don't say you can say the word red, or you can say FF0000 or F00 or 255, 0, 0. They don't need to know that. Tell them one way to write the color. When they encounter the 3 other ways later on, you can say, oh, that's just another way of writing color in CSS, and they go, oh, no big deal. Beginners are going to try to remember all 4 ways. And it's not effective, it's not helpful, okay? One way, and let them learn the other ways later. All right, not so many options, Be kind to beginners, please, be kind to beginners, and try to make the path as straight as possible for them as they're starting out. And that's pretty much all I have to say here today about Sass, as learning bridge between HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I sure am appreciative of all of you being here today. Thank you very much. Got a link up here to a 10-day trial for Safari Books Online. If you're interested in learning Sass, I do have a video up there called Getting Started with Sass that will walk you through everything from the beginning. If you're interested in watching that, you can watch it in 10 days for free. Do I have any questions? So the question is, Sass, do you have to have Ruby? The answer is no. And in fact, the syntax that I was showing you here is called SCSS. Okay, so there's actually two syntaxes that are possible. One is the actual Sass syntax, which is Ruby-like, and there's SCSS, which is more like CSS, which is what I prefer because it's like CSS. In terms of compiling, it used to be you had to have a Ruby-based compiler. That's no longer true. There's like 5,000 bazillion compilers of all various types and varieties. They run on command lines, they run on the server, they run on the client, they're GUI-based. There's all kinds of things that are out there for Sass. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you for coming. Oh, I'm sorry, yes? Yeah, so it's running Sass in a browser is the question. So Sass itself requires compiling in order for it to run. The browser only understands CSS. So your Sass files are never actually run in the browser. You have to compile. The output is CSS. The CSS is what runs inside of the browser itself. The compiler part of it, you can make as hard or as easy as you want. And this is something else we're really good at developers, is we like, okay, so in order to get started, you need to have a GitHub account. You need to have a Git, you have to have a Git server, then you have to have Bower, and then you have to have Compass, and then you have to have Node, and you have to, you know how we do this? It drives me bananas. If you're getting started, all you need is go to a website called koala-app.com. It's a GUI-based compiler. It's free. It runs on Mac and PC. It'll compile your Sass files for you. Get rid of all that workflow stuff. This is something else I probably should have put in the talk. Get rid of all that workflow stuff. That can come later. Every employer does their workflows differently anyway. So if I teach you a workflow, when you go work for somebody, it's going to be a different workflow anyway. So just concentrate on the simple part of compiling. When you're actually at your employer and you're thinking about working in teams or whatever, you're going to come up with a workflow that works for you. Does that help? Okay. Plus a rant on the side. Koala, K-O-A-L-A, like the animal. Koala-app.com. Thanks.